We want to know what exactly we should do from number 1 to 15 regarding nutritional supplements, herbs, medicinal mushrooms, or any plant things. And number 2, from Margaret, what exactly do we do so we can be emotionally healthy? So if each of you would answer this question, that would be great to start.
So are you going to ask one question at a time, or would you?
That was the basic question. If each of you could try to,
Let's go down a list.
try to make it as crystal clear as you can of what it is so we could go home and know exactly what the recipe is. We never want to have a health issue. Tell us how to do that with nutritional supplements and plants and herbs. And when you go to speak, push the button. And then when you're done, push it again.
I'm going to start. So I'm going to start with emotional health here. So my journey has been really interesting because emotional health has been really, really important, but it's very tied in with physical health because many of you might know that health starts in the gut, and when your gut is out of balance, it creates toxicity that goes up into the brain and creates anxiety and depression. So when I work with clients, I find out how they're eating. I'm sure many of you know, if you've asked your friends, how do you eat? I ask my clients, how do you eat? And they say, oh, my diet's really good. And then I say, well, tell me about it. And it's horrible. And so I know that they can do all the things that I ask them to do on the emotional level, but if they're not taking care of their gut on the physical level, and I'm going to let you guys talk about that a lot, they're not going to get anywhere. So that's basic, is taking care of your gut and eating, of course, really clean, really healthy. So let me talk about the emotional aspect. What healing is knowing who you really are in your soul essence, knowing that you're not your ego, what we call the wounded self in inner bonding, and being able to tap into a higher source of love and truth and wisdom. And so the very first step, Stephen wants steps, very first step in emotional health is to move beyond avoiding your feelings. How many of you do all kinds of things to avoid feeling your feelings? Oh, come on. Come on. Everybody does things. You do things like you judge yourself. You stay up in your head and you don't connect with your body. You turn to various addictions like food or alcohol or drugs, or you make other people responsible. You blame them for your feelings. So the very first step in emotional health is getting inside your body, moving out. This is a big journey to move out of here and into your heart and soul, because this is where your feelings are. And if you're in your head, you don't know what you're feeling. And emotional health is taking responsibility for your own feelings. Most of our feelings have an enormous amount of information for us. And it's very sad that most people have learned to put a lid on their feelings. And once they do, then they don't want to feel them, and they avoid them with things like junk food. I mean, how many of you have at one time or another, maybe not now, been addicted to sugar or other forms of processed food and junk food? You don't have to raise your hand. You don't have to. But many people have been. There's emotional eating. That's what it's about. Emotional eating is about avoiding responsibility for your feelings. And when you learn how to take responsibility for your feelings, you become very motivated to eat well. You become very motivated to create a healthy body for your soul to live in. You become very motivated to learn about who you really are inside. And this is what I teach. So step one is getting into your body, using your breath, using meditation to get present in your body. And then step two is, in the process we teach inner bonding, is that there's only two intentions. One is the intention to learn about loving yourself, and the other is the intention to avoid pain with some form of controlling behavior. So step 2, you open to learning. I'm going to be talking a lot about this tomorrow. And step 3 is you find out what your feelings are telling you. If you're feeling anxious or depressed or angry, these feelings are informational. They're telling you a lot of things, and you have to be willing to find out what they're telling you. Again, we're going to talk about that tomorrow. And then step 4 is that you're willing to learn how to open to a higher source of love and wisdom and be asking, what's loving? What's loving to me? It's one of the most important questions that you can build into your life moment by moment is what is loving to me? And then step 5 is you take that action. What's loving to you, like you would for a child? And then step 6, you tune in to how does that feel? So that is what I'm going to be going in a whole lot tomorrow. Thank you. And by the way, I started on this process when I was 22 years old. That was 58 years ago. I'm 80 years old now. And I am in fantastic health with fantastic vitality. So I got to tell you, I know what I'm talking about.
Okay, I want to introduce the final member of our panel. Chris Kilham is a medicine hunter, author, and educator. He's the founder of Medicine Hunter, Inc. Chris has conducted medicinal plant research in over 45 countries. Chris works with companies to develop and popularize traditional plant-based food and medicinal products into market success. These include ashwagandha, kava, maca, rhodiola, schizandra, tamanu oils, cat's claw, dragon's blood, ayahuasca, and hundreds of other plants. CNN calls Chris the Indiana Jones of natural medicine. Chris has appeared in over 1,500 radio programs and more than 500 TV programs worldwide with features in the New York Times, ABC News Nightline, Newsweek, CNN, The Dr. Oz Show, NBC Nightly News, Good Morning America, ABC 2020, Oprah and Friends, CNN, MSNBC. Chris also writes articles on plant medicines for several publications and was a special guest correspondent and weekly contributing columnist on Fox News Health for 9 years. Chris is a regular guest on The Dr. Oz Show and serves on The Dr. Oz Show's Medical Advisory Board. I'd like to bring up Chris Kilham. Okay, we can continue. Sure.
So I want to thank Margaret for doing a very nice job. Actually, I want to thank Steve for doing an incredible job of organizing all this. And then just open with a little prayer of merging the heart and the mind. Shemiku kudashabrihu ushinate bi'ilu imulaiha chemyuke bavake biudashlam Hashem kozreal kolam amen. So it is about integrating the heart and the mind. So I want to comment on, or comment is the wrong word, add to what you're talking about. So as a orthomolecular psychiatrist, since the mid-70s, now about 46 years, I've accumulated a certain amount of work working with both people who are psychotic as well as people who are depressed and so forth and so on. In my book, Depression Free for Life, I talk about a 90% success rate, okay? And feelings are part of it. But what I've also come to realize, even though I'm trained as a psychiatrist, that there is more going on. And I talk about it as the biologically altered brain. So I want to give a little background to that because part of the problem is the brain has been biologically altered. So it's not all psychological. And what do I mean by that? Well, this is unbelievable, but since 1850 till now, we have approximately 100 times more mental disability, meaning people not able to work in relationship to the population. That's very significant. A good part of this has been related to the use of psychotropic drugs. Okay, now I won't go into the whole thing, and there's like hours of discussion about it, but I want to say some very clear things. Research I was involved in since 1972 is that what we know is when people are given psychotropic drugs, as the head of the 1996, Dr. Hyman said, of the NIMH, there is a perturbation in the brain function. Now let's go a little further. This has to do with antipsychotic drugs, it has to do with antidepressant drugs, and it has to do with anti-anxiety drugs. They actually change the structure and function of the brain. And it isn't all that easy to reverse it. But just to give you an example, because there's a mythology out there that it's important to let go of before we can step in to say, well, what can we do? At 90%, we can do a lot better than what they were doing. So the research shows actually people get worse on psychotropic drugs. I was involved in some of the initial research in the 1970s with top people from the National Institute of Mental Health, like Jonathan Coles, who's the head of it. And basically what we found is when people were given antipsychotic drugs, they got worse. What does worse mean? They got better for a few weeks. What does worse mean? It means in the 5-year follow-up, they had a much higher rate of rehospitalization than people have received no medication. Think about that. Because we have a mythology is that people need these things. No, it makes them worse. And it's dose-related, meaning the higher the dose, the more amount of relapse. And that also is true with depression, antidepressant drugs, and also with the anti-anxiety, and also with all the drugs our kids are getting today for, quote, hyperactivity, which translate a little bit further. The antidepressant drugs are associated with a very high rate of moving into manic depressive. Once you're in manic depressive, and we're talking according to the American Psychiatric Association, up to 20% of people who receive antidepressants go into manic depression, and then we're talking about psychosis and more medication. What's the end result? We got 100 times more people on mental disability. So kind of get what we're talking about. Now, that holds true with the anti-anxiety drugs. They look good at 4 weeks. They are better than not. At 8 weeks, it's a break even, and at 23 weeks, all the psychoactive, anti-anxieties like the benzodiazepines and so forth, they actually make you worse. So at 23 weeks, you have more anxiety attacks, more panic attacks. So all the medications people are taking are actually literally and scientifically making people worse. Now, once we kind of get that, even though you may get some relief, as I say, at 4 weeks, the anxieties, that's good. 8 weeks to break even, and then 23 weeks worse, is that we need to let go of the myth that these things make any difference. And the National Institute of Mental Health has made it clear that all the theories of excess dopamine, excess serotonin, none of them have been proven true. We don't actually know what goes on. As literally, as the head of the National Institute of Mental Health said, Stephen Hyman in 1990, we don't really know what the problem is. Okay, once you get that, then suddenly you're treating things holistically makes a lot more sense, which is what you were talking about, which obviously includes the emotional part, but also includes the nutritional part, includes the building up the neurotransmitters. It includes optimal nutrition. It includes a live food diet. My book, where 90% success rate with depression is a whole 100% vegan and at least an 80% live food diet. It includes avoiding things you're allergic to. I remember in the 70s, somebody got an injection of wheat, and they went psychotic in 15 seconds. It was a course I was taking, and it's like, I can't believe I'm seeing this. 15 seconds and you're psychotic? It really woke me up to the fact that allergies, food allergies, can make a huge difference. It's not just something in your mind, so to speak. It's very real physiologically. And it's also inflamed. So that's the background where we start looking at, okay, what kind of nutrients can we do to rebalance it? Which is this hardcore thing that Steve's talking about. But please understand, we're all unique individuals. We have 20, 30,000 genes and probably 200,000 gene variations. So there isn't not one pat formula for everyone. But there's some general strokes. So when we're going to talk about brain, which is different than body health somewhat, we're really going to talk about what's going to build the brain, what's going to build the the neurons. So one of the first things is phospholipids. Phosphatidylserine is an example of that. Very important. Next, we're going to look at the omega-3s. People always test for the DHA. EPA is in there too, particularly for manic depression. But I've seen women come to me with 10 years postpartum depression, and in 3 weeks with DHA, go to normal. There's a long explanation, but we're not doing too many explanations. I'm making Stephen happy here, okay? He's very straight-faced, but truly, we want to get that it works. It works a high percentage of the time. So that's pretty simple. But what are we talking about? The neurons, their membranes working right. That's what we're talking about. We need long-chain of the omega-3s, the DHA and EPA. That's why it's a little dangerous to go on a really low-fat diet. Yes, we do need cholesterol. You're going to hear some controversy about it. We do need omega-3s. What we know is cholesterol, which is the hormone, mother of all hormones, is that if you're at the 25% percentile, you're going to have double the amount of suicide. If you're at the lowest percentile, you're going to have 6 times more suicide because you need the cholesterol to make the hormones, to make the neurotransmitters.
Repeat that again so they understand it. That's very important.
Okay. Thank you. We're buds, you know. He's going to help out. So what I'm saying is there's a lot of fear about cholesterol, which is, as far as I'm concerned, not too accurate. And I'm saying the research shows that if your cholesterol is in the lower 25 percentile out of 100, you will have double the amount of suicides and depression. If you're at the lowest amount, you're going to have 6 times, get what I just said, 6 times more suicide and depression because you're really not making the hormones because you're cholesterol deficient. I actually learned that partly at Columbia Medical School, where we understood that low cholesterol was associated with mental disease. Now, I'm also going to say this is true with the omega-3s. If you're in the lowest percentiles with that, you will have very similar, more depression and more suicide. And the research is out there. So I'm very concerned about people going low on cholesterol, which to me is less than 160. I'm not going to get into the whole cholesterol issue. I'm trying to make a point. We need the long-chain fatty acids, and we need the cholesterol. Now, those are key. Now, there are other supplements, and this work has been done again since the 70s that play a big role in treating psychosis. You get about a 50% success rate with that, and that's B3, B6, B12, and magnesium. They balance and enhance neurotransmitter production, and that's really the beginning of orthomolecular psychiatry because they got such good results with just doing that. We can do better because I already told you we're adding the omega-3s, we're adding phosphatidylserine, and so these are things that make a difference. Now, other things, magnesium is very important. It's involved in over 300 enzymes and metabolic function in the brain alone. So we need the magnesium. People are magnesium deficient, lots of problems. I'm talking about the brain here, primarily. So those are your big players, and being deficient in any of those can lead to a lot of mental disorders. You know, you've heard of pellagra and so forth, but I'm talking about psychosis and I'm talking about anxiety. So those are, I'm going to say, are your, you know, your bigger players. I think zinc is important, potassium is important. When we look at blood sugar problems, including diabetes, we're again looking at depression, we're looking at Alzheimer's disease, double the amount of Alzheimer's with diabetes. So we need to improve the blood sugar. There's lots of things for that, but having that awareness. So those are some of the players that are very important for mental health. One of the things that concerns me is kids as early as 3 years old being put on, you know, anti-hyperactivity things, and that Ritalin has lots of problems, but actually it's like a long-acting cocaine. So when we see the progression, got to understand the word progression here, then the kids are in their teens and they're moving towards cocaine because the Ritalin is not working, but you're having again, as Stephen Hyman says, a perturbation in brain function, a breakdown in brain function. And the longer these kids are on the drugs, the more breakdown in that process. So in the rebuilding of the brain, so one of my subspecialties is slowly taking people off these medications. The brain has downgraded itself in a variety of ways, which I don't need to give you the details, but slowly you have to withdraw. It can take up to 4 months to withdraw. But at the same time, I'm adding these supplements plus in a holistic health point of view, because that's, you know, we have to rebalance all the endocrine system and the neurological system and the neurotransmitters. All are thrown out of balance. So we have to look at all the pictures. And I'm just going to review that again. So,
Dr. Cousens, let's move on. Let's
okay.
Chances.
Okay, so I'll come back the next round and talk about on the physical things, but this is kind of an overview for mental, an aspect of mental health. Obviously, emotional mental health is very important, and from a spiritual point of view, the personality is a case of mistaken identity. Think about that for a second.
Let's move on right now.
So we go beyond the mind. So those are your perspectives.
I would just like to add that from the research that I've done, every single mass shooter has been on the psychotropic drugs.
Absolutely. Because it seriously upgrades not only suicidal but homicidal activities. Jonathan Coles, who I study with, actually went to the Ph.D. and said this. They didn't listen. The rate is 3 times to 4 times higher rate of suicide and homicide with the psychotropics. Pretty intense. Yeah.
So still back to the original question about the specific, specific supplements, herbs, plants that we should be doing to avoid disease.
Well, you were asking about emotional health, right? Initially?
I was asking Margaret about emotional health, and I was mostly asking everyone else about the supplements for overall health, but if it affects emotional health, then great.
Well, certainly for mental health, there's a whole category, I'm sure many of you know about this, called the adaptogens. These are botanicals that have very broad effects, like rhodiola rosea, which is now being used by psychiatrists worldwide in place of antidepressant drugs that don't work. with very, very good positive results. We see work coming out of Columbia University Medical Center and New York University Hospital with regard to that. We also see with the herbal extract ashwagandha, which I'll be speaking about tomorrow morning quite a bit, greatly improved mental function, improved clarity of thought, improved recall, short-term and long-term memory, thought formation, the ability to perform mental work, and greatly reduced stress. With plant medicines, and don't worry, I won't go on forever about this, I'll be brief, but plant medicines are not like pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals are typically one single molecular compound with a desired target. They're supposed to do something in your body. Botanicals may have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 800 different compounds, thereby working in the body in a variety of ways. And specifically, rhodiola rosea and ashwagandha demonstrate profound benefits for overall function, cardiovascular system, immune system, kidney health, liver detoxification, brain function, and more, with virtually no toxicity. When you look at the long-term use of these, ashwagandha enjoying about 4,000 years of use that we know of among hundreds of millions of people with a great safety record, and rhodiola rosea probably an equal amount of time and probably somewhat less of a number, but still immense. We see that we have in these two botanicals great aid not only for overall energy, endurance, and stamina, but also for improved mood, for improved mental clarity, and for an overall better feeling. And just to close on this, when you can take an herb that you can feel, then you really get that plant medicine works. If you take milk thistle to detoxify your liver, hopefully nobody goes, wow, I can really feel those Billy Verdens and Billy Rubens working in my liver right now. That's crazy talk. But when you have more energy, when you sleep better, when your sex life is better, when you get up in the morning, feel thoroughly rested, when you've got enough of whatever you need to power through the day, when you're more inspired and when you're happier, that's an experience. And when you get the right botanicals, you can have that experience. These are not cure-alls. These will not solve all your emotional problems. These will not take care of every little thing. But they can, if you stay with them, radically improve the quality of your life in remarkable and positive ways. Thank you.
And let's not forget the ultimate adaptogen, ginseng.
That's right.
I'm on. So from an integrative perspective, going back to the original question, because I know that we're talking about brain health, but I just want to say, in general, you're talking about if you were to go to someone's house and look in their cupboard, right? So going back to the original question, I'm always looking at first, since that's my area of specialty, is what is the person taking to lower their inflammatory exposure or their inflammation in their body. I'll be giving a lecture tomorrow at 4, so hopefully you come and listen to it, or you can take a look at my book, An Inflammation Nation, to learn more about that. Also looking at things that are strengthening your immune system, right? Because it's always about lowering inflammation, increasing your immune system. If there's any problems with the patient's microbiome, or if someone has gut problems, making sure that there's some kind of product or aspect in that area. Adaptogens are very important, so I do definitely agree with what they were talking about before. But when we have the appropriate guidance, when we go to learn about plant medicines, then we like to look at plant medicines as they were designed to be delivered. And so certain adaptogens are given at certain ages, actually, and certain times of the year. And so we go one step further when we have the understanding of not just understanding that this is a class of plants that are good and they're relatively safe and they're effective, but we like to then look at how the traditional medicines were prescribed. And that's sometimes lost in the supplement industry, because you'll see tons of formulas or tons of things, or just, you'll probably see it as well, tons of adaptogen formulas or tons of tinctures, and they all can have wonderful benefits, but we like to go a little bit further and say, how can we then maximize the use of those things? So when it comes to nutrients, for example, like we test for those things, because it's not just saying we do need to eat a whole food plant-based diet, number one, and I'll talk about foods that trigger inflammation tomorrow, but what we like to look at further on is like supplements are supplementing the diet, but they're never replacing the diet. So we can never look at redundancy. I don't look like, don't take a supplement that you're pretty much eating. I look at that way. Now, we like to test for the level, so if there's a deficiency, then that's when supplementation is magical, because then that means the body was needing it, or the person's microbiome was dysfunctional in absorbing it, or they just couldn't get access, or they're not eating enough of that. But we can then design a program by looking at testing and looking at which foods have those nutrients, so that we can really be guided on giving food as medicine. And then when we take plant medicines, we like to make sure that their potency, purity, safety, and efficacy is assured, so we can deliver it as plant medicines.
Right. I feel like the thyroid's best friend. How many of you have thyroid problems here? So, a pituitary makes TSH on a blood test. It's called thyroid-stimulating hormone, and that helps to make the T4, T3 that you see on a blood test. And, the numbers might be really fine, and you might have all the symptoms of thyroid problem. So our soil used to have plenty of iodine. We didn't swim in chlorine pools, and we didn't have fluoride in our water and our toothpaste, and God knows where you get it. So fluoride, chlorine, bromide is actually taking out the iodine. And iodine is what your thyroid is asking for. 80% of your iodine is in your thyroid, and then 20% is between, for women, your ovaries, your muscles, and bones. And so it's really important that we get iodine. And so how do we get iodine? Well, we have seaweeds. So there's kelp, there's dulse, there's seaweeds from other countries that people have used for many, many years. Of course, here on the coast of America, you have kelp. And I talked about the white Vikings this morning, and they used kelp because it was such a good food. It had great fat, great calories, great protein, and they knew how nourishing it was. So that's been used for thousands and thousands of years. So there is many forms of iodine. It has to be ionic. It has to be bioavailable. So there's many kinds. And seeing what it did to my mom, because if you don't have enough iodine, you either will end up with an overactive or underactive thyroid. My mom had an underactive, which means the numbers when you see on TSH go high, high, high. So it's like the opposite. You see the numbers on TSH be high, that means you're underactive. If it's very, very low, you're overactive. And that's underactive means you get a goiter eventually. And she had a big, big goiter. Now, that's just beginning of many other problems in our life. So we want to stop before it goes too far. Overactive, you hear about Graves' disease, Hashimoto. And these people, some are losing their thyroid. It's nuked away. And what we've seen is if we can get enough iodine from early time, selenium, zinc, this is what the thyroid is asking for. We get so much from our food, but when it comes to supplements, I would supplement with low-dose iodine, eat seaweed, but also have selenium and zinc as a part of daily life. And talking about adaptogens, we love adaptogens. My dad, who's still alive, in 92, I sent him adaptogens. There's a business that we deal with that from Canada that's made an amazing product. And I shipped them to Sweden, and he has more energy than he ever had. It is so amazing that he keeps telling me, keep sending it. And of course, the one he likes have CBD in it too. And of course, every country that have pharmaceutics, seeing what CBD does, they ban it. So I have to smuggle it in. But anyway, he gets it. But it's, it's very important to take care of your thyroid. So be kind and realize that it actually take care of the absorption of protein into your cells, oxygen into your cells, cholesterol into your cells. And it takes care of your whole metabolism. And when it's down, you're down. You're going to lose your hair. You're going to have constipation. You're going to feel depressed. You're down. So to me, it's like we need to be the thyroid's best friend. And please never have a cell phone here, because the thyroid sits right here. It's like a butterfly behind your vocal cord. It is so sensitive to radiation that never, ever put the cell phone here. Okay? Thank you.
Well, thank you for your comments about thyroid and iodine. Iodine is a mineral that used to occur everywhere, but long ago it washed down into the seas, and it's no longer available from land animals or plants. So that's why the seaweed is so important. And I'm glad you mentioned selenium, because thyroxine can only be transformed into T3 or triiodothyronine if you have selenium. So you really need the two together, and if you have one and not the other, you still can be in trouble. And the thyroid is, of course, the master regulator of metabolism throughout the body. So if it's too high, you tend to kind of burn up, and if it's too low, well, you tend to kind of pudge out and get tired. Very important. Thank you. Well, we were asked about which nutrients might be good to have. My way of learning which nutrients we might be low in is by using my dietary analysis software that I've been writing for decades. And so I plug in for you what you ate and how much you ate of each thing during a day and drank. And then I plug it into the software, and I can see if you got enough selenium or zinc or any of the other things. Now, when I test vegans, and also reading the literature too gives me good insight on what vegans might need, and the fact that I've been a vegan for now 50 years, thank you. I see that vegans tend to be low in calcium. And so I make an effort to get enough calcium in my diet. And there are many foods that have calcium in them. Sesame seeds or sesame tahini, a great way to get calcium. Organic tofu has a lot of calcium in it. Greens have calcium, all the greens. There's nuts and seeds often have calcium too. But when you add it all up, typically vegans get about 550 milligrams of calcium, maybe as much as 700 milligrams of calcium a day. And yet, the World Health Organization has an estimate for low protein diets where you don't need as much calcium as you do on a high protein diet, like an American diet. So on a low protein diet, I'd say you need about 800 milligrams. In other words, I fall short every day, and it's a rare day when I cross 800, or any vegan that I've ever analyzed crosses 800. Some raw fooders with lots of nuts and seeds manage to cross that barrier, but it's kind of hard. So what do? Well, I actually supplement my calcium every day to make sure that it's enough, because strong bones are really important. We don't want osteoporosis, and broken hips can be just a devastating impact on a person's life. So make sure you get enough calcium, calculate it if you can, and supplement it if you need to. But the number one supplement for calcium is calcium carbonate, which most doctors recommend, but the absorption may be as low as 3%. So if you take 1,000 milligrams of calcium carbonate, you may be actually absorbing about 30, and that's not a very big dent in the 1,000 you may need. So make sure the form is good. There are many forms of calcium that I outline in my book, Vitamins and Minerals, Demystified, from both food and from plants. Another thing I find low in vegans and other people too is the omega-3s that were mentioned. And omega-3s are vitally important. Flax powder, if you grind up flax, is one of the nice ways to get omega-3s. From that, you get the plant-based alpha-linolenic acid. This is the basic plant omega-3. in our bodies, we are all able to transform this into EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, and then transform that into DHA, docosahexaenoic acid. I wrote a whole chapter in my book, Fats and Oils Demystified, that covers the conversion in the human body from ALA to EPA. Now, we need these long-chain fatty acids like EPA to form the basis for eicosanoids. And the omega-3 eicosanoids are able to quench inflammation. They are able to quench pain, painful prostaglandins. Their ability to be transformed into leukotrienes is very good for lowering inflammation. They are absolutely essential. Some people have some trouble making EPA from ALA. There are quite a few different nutrients that are needed for this process to occur. It's a three-step process. The first step, the enzyme, delta-6 desaturase, changes it to add one more unsaturated bond. Now, it's interesting that there's a seed called echium seeds that contains stearidonic acid, which is what results from that first step. That's the limiting step of rate that limits our ability to make EPA from ALA. In other words, if you can do it, make your EPA from ALA. One reason is that when you take a supplement, even if it's algae-based, it's very likely to be rancid. And rancid long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids can lead to DNA adducts and cancer and malondialdehyde. They are very unhealthy. The other reason, of course, with fish oil is that they're very heavily polluted, just like the fish are. And many of the pollutants, like PCBs, the polychlorinated biphenyls, concentrate in the fish oil. So it's hard to find a fish oil that's not heavily polluted. And even the algae oils may. Krill oil, for instance, absorbs fluorine and is a high source of that. It can be dangerous. Other things that vegans might be low on if they're eating especially, you mentioned a super low-fat diet, can be a real problem with vitamin E, because vitamin E is something that's found in fatty foods like nuts and seeds and avocados and olives. And it's important to eat those foods if you want to get enough vitamin E, which 93% of Americans are deficient in. So you might consider supplementing vitamin E either with walnuts and sunflower seeds are two great sources, or if necessary, with a supplement. But with the vast, vast majority of supplements providing only a synthetic fake vitamin E that is not helpful at all and possibly slightly harmful, it's the synthetic alpha tocopherol is a mixture of 8 isomers, only one of which is the real alpha tocopherol. The others are fake. And so I cannot think of a commercial vitamin with vitamin E, and I know why, because it costs quite a bit more. It costs as much for the real vitamin E in the brain and body food supplement I make as it does for everything else in the multivitamin. It's just, that's why manufacturers don't use it. So vitamin E could be low on a vegan diet. Sometimes I even want to supplement with vitamin C. And the reason is that, as has been pointed out, our food has been hybridized. It's been changed to taste better, to be more watery and sweet than it used to be originally. I mean, wild lettuce is very bitter, but modern lettuce is pretty sweet and tasty. Well, this has degraded the nutrients in the food too. So I find that vitamin C in the wild, a person could eat 1,200 milligrams per day. But what we get as the most whole plant food vegan is perhaps 400 milligrams per day. So I choose to supplement vitamin C as well. And this is very easy to do. It's quite safe, and it has a lot of good effects on the human body. Now, 2 more things about vegan supplementation. We really need to get vitamin B12. And since we don't get it in our food, we need to supplement it. So I use 200 micrograms of the methylcobalamin form of vitamin B12. And it's also vital that we get folate. Now, most vegan diets are replete with folate because we eat lots of greens and beans. And that's where folate's found, also nuts and seeds. So no problem if you're eating those, but if you're not, then you're going to need it. There's obviously lots more you could say about the vitamins and minerals and essential factors that humans might need. Those trace minerals like selenium and zinc, those are also very important too. Okay, I think that's about a wrap for vegan nutrition. Thank you.
I just want to add a few little points. First of all, iodine is really good for brain, and more important, nutrition for mitochondria. So a lot of people are depleted because of all that's going on there, and there's 3 key supplements I would recommend, iodine being 1, D-ribose being 2, and then CoQ10 PQQ. They're all specific for rebuilding the mitochondria, for regenerating them. That's important. And then antioxidants, because there's so much free radicals being created in our environment today that a broad range of antioxidants is really important to do. One of the better ones is astaxanthin. It's a very, very potent antioxidant. But the whole idea is we are hit by a lot of things that are creating free radicals, and they destroy the mitochondria. So to protect your mitochondria, those are the basics I would recommend for that.
Totally agree. And also, he mentioned the carotenoids, and that's something that we should get on a good plant-based diet. We should get plenty of colorful carotenoids in our food, and we do. But they're fat-soluble nutrients, and also interesting, you mentioned the super low-fat diets, very difficult to digest and absorb the carotenoids or the vitamin E or any of the fat-soluble nutrients. And of course, we mustn't forget vitamin D, essential for brain health. Vitamin D3 is something that should be supplemented. I agree that we probably shouldn't go over 400 IUs a day or 1,000 micrograms a day. But we shouldn't go too far under it either, especially in this kind of a climate. Thank you.
And actually, vitamin D is needed for mitochondria as well.
1905 was the year that we discovered the first nutrient. So this is a relatively new science. That was discovered by William Fletcher in London. 1928, here in the United States at Cornell, chemists and biologists came together and made it a science. So that's even less time. 1968, arguably one of the smartest people who lived in the last century or so, Linus Pauling created what we spoke about earlier, orthomolecular medicine. But the evil year was 1933, when Merck of Germany created the first synthetic supplement. And I speak about this in my book, Supplements Exposed, which came out the early part of the 21st century. And now over 90% of the nutrients that are on the market worldwide are chemicals, and they are harmful chemicals. Not only do they not supply nutrients that are taken into the cells and utilized in tissue, but they in fact challenge the immune system and weaken overall health of people. So that premise starting, the only supplements we need to be considering if we are at least a little bit sensible would be food-based, uncooked, unprocessed supplements. So I've been doing work on that. The same year this gentleman became a vegan I did, 1970.
All right.
Yeah. And it was great. The other night I was speaking in Florida, and I actually spoke about 15 steps from the house I lived in where I literally decided to become vegan. I didn't know what it was, but it sounded good to me, so I became one. So at Hippocrates, I've looked at 17,500 people with very sophisticated tests on nutrient deficiencies, and here's what I've discovered over the last several decades. What is most lacking? Well, one or two of you mentioned B12. After 33 years of looking at this deeply, about 7 out of 10 of you lack B12. I don't want to have you consider that it's only a vegan problem. So I can show you the data that there's an 8% higher incidence of B12 deficiency in animal food consumers. So it's not a vegan problem. And I don't want to be elaborate on this, but it's an intestinal problem, an anatomical problem. We're wildly different than we were several hundred years ago. We don't have the little pocket at the bottom of the large intestine that cultured this bacteria we name B12. It's really not a B vitamin. Number two, selenium, which was mentioned. I can't speak strongly enough about that. It is lacking in all the soils everywhere in the world to get a good source of organic ionic. Ionic means what you'd find in plants itself, electrically charged. There's a dance, a beautiful dance between cells energy and food energy. And that's the food that's really taken up into the cell and utilized as nutrition. And if you just take a normal, non-organic nutrient, mineral, it's not going to work in your body. You're going to get readings in the blood test. It's just floating around in the bloodstream. It's not entering the tissue mass. Iodine, I don't know what happened, but in a way I think there must have been a conspiracy. When they realized how incredibly important iodine was at the beginning of the 20th century, they made it really bad. It's a bad thing, don't take it. But seemingly my grandmother, my mother, and every woman I ever met as a child didn't know that, because if you broke your arm or cut off, they put iodine on it. It's an amazing thing. And the type of iodine that Gabriel and Anna Maria and I, to some smaller level, use is electrically charged iodine. Now, something we talked about, mitochondria, which is an interesting enough story, I'll repeat it. It's when you check mitochondria, it's not human DNA. It's not something that came out of our evolutionary process. So this was a life form or a parasite, for the lack of a better term, that adapted itself to the human body and literally hijacked and took over your cells. You have about 100 trillion cells in your body, and this is in every cell the energy source and, in a way, the mind of the cell. The jet fuel for that is glutathione. I think the most important work that's been done on nutritional science, other than the discovery of phytochemicals, that really took over in 1980s, 1990s, is glutathione. And when we IV that, our medical team IVs that into people, and then we have an oral form now that works, what that does to change people's health. And again, I'm used to working with catastrophically ill people and catastrophically sensible people. So either superstar athletes or somebody who's told they have 5 weeks to live. And we watch glutathione as being an important part of that. And some foods have it. Avocado have it in it. Raw asparagus have it in it, beet greens have it in it. But to do your body justice and to get you back to health again, you need to supplement on that one. I would like to comment on what you said. There's a major difference between cooked vegan diets and a green living food diet by Hippocrates. Looking at 17,500 people, I don't find people on the Hippocrates green sprout diet lacking calcium. This has so much calcium and usable calcium, it's unbelievable. Vitamin D is something, the more I study that, the more impressed I am with it. Vitamin D is really important. We actually make a supplement made out of a vine. It's the only one that in 100% of cases over the last year we've observed it correct vitamin D problems. It's made out of a vine, not lanolin from a sheep or not shiitake mushrooms. I make a protein powder that's based on the protein of a shiitake mushroom to boost the immune system, but it only has minuscule amounts of vitamin D. Another thing I would consider to be incredibly important is proteins that you're getting on an ongoing basis. And one thing they can't screw up in the supplement industry is protein. There's sort of a structure that's easy to replicate. But you can get that from a diet that basically has comprehensive amino acids in it, all the 8 or 9 or 10 essential amino acids that the body requires. And when you look at supplementing with proteins, make sure they're extracts from things like algae. For instance, the B12 we make 100% alive. When we take microscopes and look at it, it's dancing underneath there. We get our methylcyabolamine not out of a chemical laboratory, but out of blue-green algae. And that works wildly different than a methyl that you get out of a laboratory. So that's about what I have to say, but rather than emphasize what vegans are deficient in, I think we'd agree, doctor, we're the least deficient of anyone, and raw vegans are substantially less deficient in anything than anyone, and B12 is the only thing that people who eat like me really need, although I take 35 raw food supplements a day, because I'm happy being alive. Next question.
Okay, so the next question I'd like to ask is for everyone. And Margaret, you have seen private, I guess, patients, we can call them, for 40 years, 50. You speak to people, you're a very trusted and wise woman, and people trust you more than anyone that they in their whole life. You're their therapist, they come to you for complete confidentiality. So you hear the deepest, most confidential information of anyone in society. So the question is, regarding sex drive, what is the reality for women in their 40s, 50s, 60s? What should their realistic expectation be? And then the question for everyone else is, aside from what can be done from a nutritional plant, herb, supplement, with that. So I guess we could start with the question with women, and then you could also talk about men's sex drive, and then from the emotional standpoint, and then if anyone else wants to comment from the plant nutritional side.
So it's really important to understand that men and women are very different when it comes to their sexuality. Men have testosterone, which motivates them to have sex for most of their life. Women reach their peak in their mid-30s, but what happens for women, and I see this all the time with the couples that I work with, is that what motivates women sexually is very, very different than what motivates most men. I mean, this is not across the board, because sometimes it's the reverse. But women get turned on by connection, by intimacy, by being seen, by being valued, by romance. And men can often be with their partner, watch TV, and then want to have sex. And
It was a dirty show.
and most women can't do that. They need time with their partner. They need fun. They need talking. They need to be seen. They need to be valued. They need to be heard. And this is something that I deal with all the time, because almost every couple that I work with, one partner is complaining about a lack of sex. Now, most of the time, it's the man who's complaining, but once in a while, it's the woman, because she actually may have more testosterone than he does, and he may be the person who wants the intimacy, who wants the emotional connection. So it can happen both ways. But so many of the men say, well, I get my connection through sex. But the women can't feel sexual until they have the connection. And then the men say, well, why do I have to do it her way? But that's the way it's gonna be, because she's just not going to be turned on if there's not the connection, the emotional connection, the spiritual connection. If she doesn't feel loved and cared for, there's no way that she's going to be able to access her sexuality, and especially after having children. Now, of course, food makes a big difference, because, if you're eating junk, your energy is going to be too low. You're going to be too tired, especially if you have kids. You're going to be wiped out. Nobody feels like having sex when they're wiped out. And so food plays a very big part in this in terms of energy. But even the people that I see who are eating really, really well and are physically very healthy, if they don't know how to have a connection with each other, if they haven't learned to do that, if they haven't learned to resolve conflict in a way where they're learning about themselves and each other, and they feel that deep connection, most of the time one or the other, and usually it's the woman, is not going to feel like having sex. And of course, that creates a big problem for the man, because he's got the testosterone, he's got the drive, and of course he wants to have sex. There's nothing wrong with that. But they have to learn to connect, and that is what I work with when I work with couples, is helping them understand what it really means to create that deeper level of connection. And it's amazing what happens when people start to do that. All of a sudden, people who have not had sex for months or even years are starting to have sex again, because it's a natural outgrowth of that emotional connection.
I'll jump in here. A few years ago, I wrote a book called Hot Plants. I spent a few decades traveling the world investigating, I mean, I still do this, but I spent a few decades investigating plants all around the world, and everywhere I went, I would encounter plants that were, among other things, legendary for enhancing sex somehow. And there are, and I completely respect what you say about the emotional connection. I mean, obviously that's an essential. A Hawaiian elder once said a marvelous thing. He said, true healing puts into order the body, mind, and spirit with the past, the present, and the future. You can throw all the vitamins and fiber and wheatgrass at yourself that you want, but if you don't have a whole body, mind, spirit thing going on, it's not going to do much except maybe make your skin look better, okay? But that's the reality. And so the emotional connection is super important. Finding ways to open yourself up just naturally that can include meditation and yoga, something Gabriel knows about. I'm in my 50th year of daily yoga practice. I understand the value of that. But there are also botanicals out there that make a difference. I meet men and women who want to be more aroused than they are. And maca is phenomenal for that. Maca is a turnip-like plant. I've worked with it for 22 years in the Peruvian Andes now, though I don't derive money from its trade. And it is a staple food among the people in the Andes. It's made into, it actually looks like a turnip, but you dry it and then you grind it into flour, and it's used in hot drinks, cold drinks, breads, cookies, cakes, pastries, soups, sauces, you name it. And it does, in fact, get you aroused. And it appears to do this to the extent that we understand this by acting on the sex centers of the brain. Rhodiola rosea, which I mentioned before, has very good studies for enhancing both male and female sexual function in a variety of ways. A new study that came out on ashwagandha last year showed that in women, it enhanced arousal, lubrication, comfort of intercourse, and quality of orgasm. Not bad. We see Tonkat Ali from Malaysia, not to be confused with a popular boxer, Tonkat Ali, which is a tree root that has pretty profound effects in terms of boosting testosterone and enhancing erectile function. We saw three, I think, spectacular erectile function studies with red ginseng extract in large quantities a few years back. So there are botanicals that, I mean, if you don't have the connection going on with your partner, then it's kind of just, meat slapping. But if you're, for really, let's get serious here. But if you're actually, wanting to, you need a little help, and that happens with aging, then there are botanicals that can make a significant difference that are safe. The most recent so-called female Viagra drug, which they're all failures, of course, because they don't address anything that you're talking about. What you're supposed to do is right before you're about to have intercourse, you're supposed to stab yourself with a hypodermic needle to get yourself going. If anything is going to reduce the possibility of arousal, it is, unless you're like really weirdly kinky, it is stabbing yourself right before intercourse. So in addition to the emotional connection, in addition to proper nutrition, in addition to drinking water, clean water and breathing pure air and getting exercise and all the things that matter, there are herbs out there that can make a difference, that can support your sexual health. Many of them enjoy human clinical studies, and they're well worth looking into.
May I mention one more? Damiana is a botanical widely used by women that tends to warm up the core of a woman, and this has helped some women to heat up.
I couldn't disagree more strongly. that Damiana was a 1948 marketing scam by a Chicago company that came up with the idea that if they used this herb from Mexico that never had a history of sexual use, and they positioned it as the Mexican sex secret, they could make a lot of money, and they did. Varro Tyler, the very famous pharmacognosist, wrote about this extensively, and respectfully, Damiana has no sexual value whatsoever.
I think it's been pretty well covered, and I want to just give a kind of a general statement is when people are physically healthy, they're going to be more capacity to be sexually active. The issues I see as a psychiatrist, family therapist, is really fear of intimacy. And those are things I address with the couple in couple therapy about their usually mutual fear of intimacy. So those are the two issues that play a big role, generally being healthy and also fear of intimacy. That's, when you address those, you've got it.
Right. So, well, you know, we deal with so many men and women. So many men have erectile dysfunction. So many women have libido problem. And it comes to all this daily stress. You have sick people in their family, maybe the children, maybe your parents. And, you know, it really comes down to this safe place in your life that the partner has to be totally open, and there has to be the trust. There has to be safety. And I think if you don't feel that, you can't let go and you can't let in. So it's really, really that choice that we make in our life to find the right partner, and not just to have, like you said, a meat game. So
Meat slapping.
Meat slapping. And even so, it's with practice comes perfect.
So I agree with what Chris said here about the medicinal plants. There's a variety of natural plants that are used in Asia and South America and different places around the world as adaptogens, as what we call maybe aphrodisiacs or sexual enhancers. But really, when you put them together, you know, we like to use a lot of combination formulas that are like Chinese herbal or Ayurvedic formulas because they have a balancing effect. It's not just, you know we can say we can stimulate this or we can increase free testosterone there, but it's really improving libido in general. But that also has to do with, you know, giving people more energy so they're less fatigued, like you mentioned here. You know, if we're tired at the end of the day, again, which most people are, these are just extra work that people feel like they have to do. But it's you know, when I look at sexual enhancement, it's improving libido. So it's not, because it's easy to get erectile dysfunction. I mean, there's herbs that can do that, you know, but it's just getting the whole, I'm aware, I'm happy, I feel good I feel vibrant. But when it comes to sexual function, in my practice, the number one concern or complaint that I'll get from a female is like vaginal dryness, for example. You know, and you know, as women go through menopause, and we have a saying in our clinic with my partner, I'm a Marine. We always say, you know, if you're a woman, you have to retain your juiciness. You know, I'm a woman, hear me roar. And I'll just give a quick example. I was in Indonesia many years ago. And I was in a hair shop, and there was this woman. I go to hair shops when I used to have longer hair, and this is where you can get the local news of what people are talking about. And there was an American woman. She was getting her hair done in the shop. It was somewhere in Bali or somewhere in Indonesia, and she mentioned the word vaginal dryness. And these are like, you know, hair shops where everybody's talking. It's really loud, and all of a sudden it just became dead quiet. And like everybody just looked at this person like, "What do you mean vaginal dryness?" And the person from America, she's like, yeah, you know, and I haven't had sex with my husband, and blah blah blah, and my kids are in college and all. And they were shocked that she was just talking about vaginal dryness, not from a sexual standpoint, but just like, why would you have vaginal dryness? And just like, if your hand is dry or your foot is dry, you'd put a cream on it, or you wouldn't walk around with dry skin. But for some reason in Western medicine, particularly in OB-GYN and Western medical culture, it's like once someone's done with that part of having children or at a certain age, we don't discuss it. And for us, I look at it, if a woman comes to my office, she's 90 years old. I saw someone the other day, she's actually 94, and she was on her third husband now, because she outlives all of them. And the boyfriend that she's dating is 76, and he can't keep up with her, right? And so there's a little bit of like, again, I'm a woman, hear me roar, but there's a vitality. A lot of times people want to focus on sexuality, but I want to talk about vitality, because, whether sex is something that can come along with the relationship, but it's the vitality of just being happy with yourself at whatever age you are. I mean, we go to other cultures and we can see, patients in their 80s and 90s, and they're so vibrant. Right? And then here we just think of like, oh my God, we're all just kind of end up going to a nursing home or something like that. So it's a very different perspective with these other cultures, because obviously sex is an important part of a relationship, but it's also feeling, that the essence of having that you can have sex, but it's also for those people who don't need to or don't want to, is that they still should have that vitality in essence. We have formulas for that. I think that there's a variety. I don't want to just be spouting things. I mean, you can come to my lecture and read my book. That would be very helpful. But when we look at other questions like hormones, because I think that's something that we could bring up just in the transition of this talk, if you don't mind. What I see in my practice is a lot of people are now going to this anti-aging aspect of, I go to these clinics and I'm getting pellets in my butt and getting all these kind of things like that. And as an integrative physician, I see the dark side of hormones, because they usually go to clinics and they get pumped up with hormones, and everybody who's delivering hormones want men to be super high and women to be super high. And there's risk to all of those things, and I end up dealing with those risks. So there is natural things like for vaginal lubrication. There's even things that come from avocado seed extracts that have been patented now. We're evidence-based practice, so everything we use has some kind of clinical study or some kind of form to say this is why we're delivering it. But even just organic virgin coconut oil, it could be very helpful and beneficial as well. It has antibacterial properties, it's very cooling, and it's edible, so there's no toxicity with that. Unlike what gynecologists use every day, which I would never touch on anybody. So there's things that we can look at that are natural, but we always want to look at moving toward that area where it's not just chemicals or not just hormones. They do play a role. So if someone has a deficiency, we might need a supplement for a little bit of period of time. But this long-term use of those kind of things, just to say that you take this and you'll feel like Wonder Woman or Superman, that's a little bit of a false narrative that's being spun out there in the industry right now.
So about 12, 13 years ago, Anna Marie and I said, let's write a book on sex. So that led us to do deep experimentation for about 1.5 years. And we found out some really interesting things. This is 7 keys to lifelong sexual vitality. And I was really stunned. I had to read this on 2 medical journals to believe it, that the #1 user group then and now of Viagra are 20 to 28-year-old boys. They use it as a recreational drug. And boy, when I was that age, it would have fallen off if I took Viagra. I'm going to tell you. I certainly wouldn't have needed Viagra. I needed, what did they put? Saltpeter, I think, at that point. So they went around the country and they pick a very good research institute, Texas A&M, and they said, try to find a natural substitute for it. And they found something that worked for boy and girl, not just men, and it actually works 3 times better, and it's called watermelon. Watermelon has a phytochemical in it called citrulline. And the 2 parts of the watermelon that have by far the most, not the part you want me to tell you, the fruit, but the skin and the seed. And so we started to experiment it with, we actually dried the watermelon seed and grew it as we would a sunflower sprout. And my God, all I can tell you is we had chastity belts around at that point. In this book, we touch on both the nutritional aspect and visualization. We talk about visualization. We use that at the Institute. Everyone gets psychotherapy. Our comprehensive cancer programs, actually led by Dr. Ranecki, who is Carl Symington's partner for 30 years, the father of modern visualization. And it also gives you a sexual prowess, a sexual premise. So fantasizing is a healthy thing. It's not a dirty thing, because every one of us do it, but you don't admit it. That's simple. So you can close your eyes, and the ladies can use Brad Pitt. Who do we want to use? We're so old, it probably... Who? He won't say.
In my world, there's only God, so you're making
Sophia
love with
Loren
God.
or something. You have to have fun with this type of thing. I'm totally in love with my wife. She's my best friend. I trust her. There's safety in that. And every once in a while, we come out of our love bubble and we say, you know, the world would be a much better place if people had intimacy, if women felt safe. You know, even I, who consider myself a sensitive man, I may not be, I consider myself one, I'm not tender enough with Anna Maria as I should be. You know, we have this animalistic drive, and yes, it's testosterone, but it really is a cultural thing that we were taught to conquer and to be machivo and all of these things. And so I think it's really good advice that you gave us, that we love you and you trust us, so why shouldn't we have you tenderly loved? And of course, cleaning up your diet's important. The more meat you eat, the less sex you'll have, that's for sure. And plus, who the hell wants to have sex with you when you smell like meat? So that's what I have to say
on the
tonight.
Atkins diet.
So I'd like to say one more thing about sex. I've had couples where, let's say the man is in a high-powered job, and the woman goes to see him at work. And she's so turned on to him. Boy, he's in his power, and she just really enjoys watching him. And then he comes home, and he becomes a needy little boy. And she is not turned on to little boys. And so one of the things that women need is she needs him to be in his power emotionally, not just financially, not just at work. But she needs him to come to her full of love, not trying to get love, which is what's happening a lot of times. I need to have sex to get filled up. I need to have sex to go to sleep. I need to have an orgasm because I have a big talk tomorrow. You got to give it to me. That's not a turn on. And so she needs him to come to her in his power, which means he has learned to take responsibility for filling himself up with love, to share with her. He's not coming to get love from her. There's a huge difference.
A simple way of thinking about it is sexual energy is 90% in the head, 10% in the body. So what happens in the living room is key to even getting to the bedroom.
And for the men in the audience, for those who haven't moved to a plant-based diet, if you haven't seen the movie The Game Changers, there's an aspect on erectile dysfunction which will enlighten you and probably change your mind after watching that. Just a preview, remember heart disease is vascular problems, so erectile dysfunction is just the canary in the coal mine, and you can reverse that by reversing the diet. However, just by eating foods, we can actually measure, and they'll show you that on the film.
I forgot to mention nitric oxide, too. Nitric oxide, we were experimenting on that several years ago for the heart. It works for the heart, but boy, for shmutza, it really works.
Okay, next question. By the way, for many of you who are not familiar with Margaret Paul, she has a website called innerbonding.com, and she gives a lot of these information, these videos. If you're interested in finding out more about emotional health, she covers a lot of that on her website. Okay, continuing with the next question. The question is, part one is, can herbs or something be used instead of antibiotics, and which herbs, and are they as effective, and do they use antibiotics or something else in the 200 other countries outside the United States? So one is, if you have an infection, do you need antibiotics, or is there some alternative? That's the first part. The second question is, do you need probiotics after you've taken antibiotics? Is that what you're supposed to do? And then the third part is, in general, if you've screwed up your gut microbiome over the years with antibiotics and poor living, what do you do? And then the fourth part is, assume you listen to all these answers and you think you've got some great information, and this part's for you, Margaret, and you go home and you tell your partner, and your partner's completely emotionally shut down to you. So the first three parts are nutritional, and the fourth is, what do you do when you have a partner who is emotionally shut down to this information and a lot of your life? They're pretty much emotionally shut down, and it's very lonely. What do you do about it? So that's the question for everyone.
You know, there's nothing you can do about somebody who's not open to learning about what's important to you and what may be important to them physically and emotionally and in the relationship. And one of the things that happens so often is people go in to try and convince somebody. The best way is to role model it. The best way is to learn to take responsibility for yourself. If you're excited about this, go home and do it. You don't have to convince somebody. But if you do it and you start to feel better, you have more vitality, you're more alive, you're more loving, you're more really into life, they're going to eventually, hopefully say, gee, I wonder what you're doing. We have to let go of trying to control other people and become the role models.
And if I can just address the herbs and antibiotics, my wake-up call for herbs and their antibiotic power was when I was dying of dysentery in Kathmandu, Nepal in 1983. I'd lost about 35 pounds. I was on the toilet about 100 times a day. I could barely stand up. Went to an Ayurvedic physician who inspired no confidence in me whatsoever. He put me on a wooden table and he kind of held his hand over my abdomen and said, I know what's the matter with you. And in my inner dialogue was, sure you do, buddy. I didn't know at the time he was the head of the Nepal Ayurvedic Association and was one of the most brilliant doctors in Asia. But I had bacteria just raging through my system. It was like all the Nordic hordes had shown up with their axes and were just sort of hacking their way through my intestines. And he gave me a powder, just a curious powder, and then he gave me these very, very suspicious looking pellets that looked like rabbit droppings. And he said, take this powder, put a teaspoon of it in water before you eat, and take 3 of these and your symptoms will stop. And I thought, I will do this once before lunch before I call the Amsterdam embassy to get medevaced out of here. And I did that. He told me to do this 3 times a day for 9 days. The diarrhea stopped in a couple of hours. The fever broke and I could walk. And I went, okay, I'd been using herbs for sore throat and all kinds of things for years, but never to save my life. University of Kentucky did a study about 25 years ago now showing the antibacterial activity of different herbs. And most of this had to do with bacteria that can cause food poisoning. So Salmonella, Campylobacter, Yersinia, perfringens, common bacteria that can make you quite sick in food. Turmeric killed everything. Garlic killed everything. Onion killed everything. And then in descending order, other things like oregano and basil also showed very profound antimicrobial effects against those bacteria. So it is the case that you can unquestionably reduce the potential for bacterial problems by taking any number, and I mean using herbs. I don't mean getting capsules. I mean actually cooking with them, eating these things as foods. Eating onions and garlic and other things, eating turmeric, eating hot chilies. Hot chilies kill everything, including sometimes the person who eats them. And that leads to all kinds of stories that I don't think we have time for me to share, but I've had some great incidents with hot chilies out there in the trail. But I would also say there are bacteria that are so gravely serious that sometimes you just plain have to jump on them with an antibiotic temporarily. I travel with 500 milligram ciprofloxacin tablets. I rarely use them, but if I wind up going downhill with real dysentery, I take one of those and another one 12 hours later, and I'm done. So yes, herbs can demonstrate very significant antibacterial, i.e. antibiotic activity. They can help to reduce or completely eliminate the risk of many forms of bacterial illness. There was a study done with oysters a bunch of years ago had a small amount of salmonella, and they challenged that salmonella with Louisiana brand hot sauce, and it killed it on the spot. So the idea of putting hot, like Tabasco or something, on an oyster and then eating the oyster is very sensible from a bacterial standpoint. In parts of Africa where there's little or no refrigeration, they make a mashed paste out of crushed salt, ground hot chilies, and onion, and you put a little bit of that paste on your plate, and as you eat foods that might possibly contain bacteria, you do a little bite of this stuff. And if you do that on a regular basis, it will kill the bacteria, and therefore you won't get sick. So, long-winded answer, yes, herbs can demonstrate significant antibacterial properties, and there may be times when the emergency is so great that on a temporary basis, you need to get an antibiotic into you.
I'd like to say that for me, I haven't done this research, but I don't know if you know about lauricidin. It's made out of coconuts, and it just seems to stop anything in its tracks, and carnivora. So you might want to look that up. The carnivora is really expensive, like a little bottle. It's Venus flytrap. And but they both seem to be really excellent in stopping anything, so you might want to look that up.
So there's a lot of herbs.
Lauricidin, Lauricidin. You can get it on Amazon. And carnivora, I wouldn't get it on Amazon. You have to go to the company that really creates that, and you can look it up. Carnivora is Venus flytrap. It used to be illegal until President Reagan demanded it because it helped him, and then it became, it used to be illegal, and now it's legal because of President Reagan.
So in our integrative practice, when we look at a patient that has an infection, upper respiratory sinus or urinary tract, for example, then this is when you look at using plant medicines, making sure potency and the purity is key, because you're looking at the phytochemicals that are in those herbs that have those antibacterial, antimicrobial properties. And this is where it's really important, because a lot of people, aside of eating the foods that he was mentioning, like eat garlic and all those things like that, but when people buy supplements, then you're varying your ability in terms of to have that antimicrobial effect or the kill effect using it as a natural antibiotic. So you have to be really careful when you use those things. Now, we use them all the time in our practice, but then we have to look at standardized products that we know a certain dosage, and we have studies to say, then this is the dose that I give for this kind of problem, because I need that patient to have a response. Otherwise, we do have to pull, unfortunately, out every once in a while an antibiotic. But what a lot of people forget is that these are antimicrobials. So just because they're a plant doesn't mean that they're not also killing your microbiome on the other level. They're less toxic than ciprofloxacin, which I would never give, and I'll tell you later why you shouldn't take that. But He's too good of a guy. We don't want that to happen to him. But anyways, but what you have to understand is that when people take these things long term, because you'll see that a lot of products in the health market, like, oh, I think I have a candida problem, or I think I have a parasite problem, or I think I have some kind of infection, and they just take it continuously to prevent it. What they're doing is they're disrupting their microbiome, and we have patients that we can demonstrate that in because we're testing before, during, or after. And so we have to be careful when we use plant medicines that we have to respect it, that they are medicines. And a lot of times people think, like, I'm just going to take this, prevent this, I'll just take this every day. And certain herbs, like he was talking about, actually will only kill bad bacteria and not the good things. And certain herbs actually kill both. And so we have to really be skilled at understanding that that's when, so when we teach our patients, it's like we want to teach them how to do home care. So it's like, you don't call me, these are the things that you should be doing, and we will teach them. And then if it goes even further, like when we get past, say, a bacterial infection, and then it's more viral in nature, then we looking at using certain things like a coated, patentable form of a nanoparticle silver. And this is something that we could give and deliver to knock out bacteria or viruses that is easy to take. But we then have to look at, what's that dose? Is there studies to show that its effectiveness versus what may be on the market? A lot of people market like colloidal silvers and these other things like that. And we like to look at the direct studies and saying, is those products actually, what they're claiming, is it safe? Is it actually going to bioaccumulate and stay in your tissue, or are you going to excrete it? Does that form of product affect your microbiome or doesn't? And so we're very particular when we prescribe things, because I want to avoid an antibiotic as much as possible. One pill of an antibiotic can cause GI dysfunction up to 18 months later. Okay, so we need antibiotics. Sometimes we have surgery, we have car accidents, we have gunshot wounds. We need these things, but we have to start using them very sparingly and only in certain cases, because there's a lot of natural things that we can use. But we also want people, especially when we're trying to educate people, now things are available on the internet, that not just say, well, I'm just keep on taking this and not understanding like what else is this causing. And just to leave it there, why it's so important, because now that when we test microbiome, and we test it on every patient now, is that when someone comes back with a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or a candida or a parasite or some kind of overgrowth or infection, the panels that we're looking at not only test what is sensitive and resistant to, meaning like which antibiotic you should take that could be effective or which won't be effective, but they also have a panel of the natural antimicrobials. And we've been seeing in the last 10 years with our patients now, the natural antimicrobials are becoming resistant because people take them too often because they take it as a dietary supplement rather than treating it as a plant medicine. So we have to be very careful, because a lot of things that you'll see on the internet, like, oh, here's the essential oil revolution, take this every day to prevent something, now is actually causing dysfunction in their microbiome, and now there's resistance, so we can't use this as the go-to what we used to.
Well, I too have traveled and gotten dysentery, and one of my favorite things for that is, especially with Giardia lamblia, is golden seal. Now, I know golden thread is stronger, but I like golden seal just fine. If you can get real golden seal powder, it's amazing. In about 24 hours, it's gone. And I totally agree that it's not something you want to take all the time, because it does tend to kill the good bacteria along with the bad bacteria. But just for a short period of time, it's really nice. It also tones the inside of the lower intestine so that Giardia lamblia has little suckers that stick onto the mucous membrane, and they're not able to hold on anymore, so they not only die, but they go away. And the whole thing's over with. Now, as far as the health of the lower intestine, probiotics are not something that I think should be necessary. If we're eating a whole plant diet, principally raw, then our intestine is going to be very happy. And what happens is the fiber and the indigestible starches that go there are the food for the bacteria. When the bacteria get this food, they're able to create short-chain fatty acids, typically butyrate, which is a short-chain fatty acid. Butyrate is a principal energy source for the cells lining the lower intestine. When they get this energy source, they're happy. They're not irritated. They're not as likely to get infected or damaged in any way. And no probiotic is needed, no prebiotic is needed, except for what's in the food. So I would prefer that people can eat a whole plant diet, principally raw, and then that's going to make their intestines so happy that it is extremely rare for anything to bother it. Now, of course, if you're taking antibiotics, that's going to bother it. But again, it shouldn't take long for your intestinal bacteria to reorder itself. Typically, it only takes 3 days for enough generations of these bacteria to mutate to eat whatever it is you're feeding them. So they're happy with fiber, and they're very unhappy with what's left over from meat digestion. So keeping our stomachs happy is really not that hard. Thank you.
I tend not to hardly ever give antibiotics, ever, except if somebody has a blood infection and that can move to septicemia. I consider that a really important, like, emergency level. And if that's the case, I'm going to refer them to somebody who really specializes in that situation rather than me. Now, we all make choices. I was in many years ago in a motorcycle accident where I lost 9% of the skin. Now, that's enough to get you hospitalized. I refused to do that, and besides not wearing clothes for 2 weeks because I couldn't be touched, really used the basic herbs that ultimately healed it with no real scarring, okay? Now, that's just an example of, well, you have to have a certain amount of, let's say, intention with that. The other thing that's helpful, both for the gastrointestinal, but for other things, as you mentioned, golden seal, comfrey, and slippery elm are phenomenal for dealing with intestinal inflammation in general. You got to be careful with the golden seal. You can't take too much, but a little bit is really good. And, you know, colitis, which is a more chronic infection, is important. One of the things that I do is also recommend fasting. And if somebody has an intestinal, fasting doesn't give food to the infection, whatever that is. So those are just kind of some things to think about. In India, we didn't have much things, having lived there for 7 years. And we did things like, you're not going to want to hear this, but urine fasting. And it was the most powerful healer for all the different ranges of intestinal problems, as well as the...
Explain to the why. Explain to the why. The antigens, antibodies.
Well, I don't want to get too detailed, but it works. And also for all kinds of skin infections and so forth. Well, I'm going to go there. So those are some things. Now, why do I stay away from antibiotics? From a diabetes prevention point of view, if you have 5 courses of antibiotics in 15 years, you double your rate of getting diabetes. That's just an example of that. So it's really important to have a strong, let's say, intestinal flora. Personally, I don't really take the supplements so much, but I do kimchi that we do on a regular basis, which I think builds the prebiotics and the probiotics as a way of maintaining that, because we are faced with so many different stresses on our gastrointestinal tract. So something simple like 1 or 2 tablespoons of kimchi. If your person has trouble with heat too much, just the sauerkraut. So those are some very simple ways. Now the final thing is that when anyone has an acute infection, really we want to build the immune system, because it's already compromised. And so we want to, I focus a lot, not only on the topical or the specific herb for the specific infection, but also build the immune system, which I used a variety of Chinese herbs to build the immune system in the midst of it. My preference is prevention. We're right now talking about this virus from China. So, no, coronavirus, yeah. And we want to build our immune system as part of that whole story. It's when we're weakened is when we're susceptible to a variety of systemic infections. And the local things, again, there's so many different things we can use, but we want to build the immune system really so the infections can't really get started. And the antibiotics tend to undermine our overall immune resistance as well. So that's kind of the approach I take. It's also important not to impose that on anyone for a variety of reasons. They have to be willing to go that direction. But it does work, and I literally, in 47 years, have not really used antibiotics, but people have gone for that. So those are, I think, some of the things to consider in the picture of that. Okay.
Yeah, it's come down to prevention, and your immune system is so impeccable. It's an amazing intelligence. It takes only 3 days for your immune system to figure out what to do with the infection, and it will make the antibody within 3 days. So how do we work it? Yes, I think fasting while we're waiting for the antibody, on juices. And I'm a garlic queen, and garlic, good enough, it actually only kills bad bacteria. It does not kill anything good, except your friends.
That's right.
So it's okay. So the trick that we do for people to be able to eat more garlic is that we take flax seeds. Let's say you take 2 tablespoons of flaxseed in a big glass of water, let it sit overnight. Stir it a few times, stir it when you drink it. And because flax seeds are mucilus, they actually will protect your whole gastrointestinal tube so you don't burn. And then we chop apple in slices and garlic in slices, and we eat it like a sandwich. And we eat many. I mean, if you can get 2, 3, 4 cloves 3 times a day. And by that time, now for 3 days, you have antibodies. They're going to war. And by the 4th or 5th day, you usually are up and around. So, but that's when I've worked on prevention, that I already have built up my immune system so that even when this new infection comes, by the way, as we're flying over here, this lady come here with a mouth protection. She sits down and she says, I was just at the fish market in China. I'm like, okay.
Imagine that.
Yes, that's exactly what she said. I know. So,
We love people until then.
yes. Well, so fear is a big part. And, when we get sick, we get fear. We get afraid because it is, and every child knows this. Every child, it's like brand new in their mind. And unless you have parents that are confident, and this will go fine, and this is what we're going to do. Of course, for our children, I used silver. We used, what did you mention? No, Argentine, but the one you just mentioned, that's so good. Anyway, we've used, what's the name? Golden seal. There you go. Golden seal is amazing. So just for a day or 2, of course, that's not something you go on with. But that has been for us. And taking baths at that time with sea salt and with baking soda has been amazing to help them. So if a child needs to take antibiotic, for sure we will put them on probiotic. And it happens. People come to the institute and suddenly get severe high fever and infection that they brought with them. And, incubation often takes 3 days. So they probably caught something on the way, and then by the time they get to us, and sometimes we have to do antibiotic. So, and, most people don't use antibiotics so often. But some people, like you said, if they use it very often, that is the steroids. Now you see blood sugar and liver. You see all kinds of problems. So let's prevent. That's what we do.
Thank you. Anna Marie, I really like your comments about fear and stress, suppressing the immune system. And our medical system sometimes initiates this fear and stress with the very diagnosis that is given to you.
White coat syndrome.
Yeah, well, it is very scary to get a diagnosis. But if we can keep ourselves centered it boosts our immune system. When we're under stress, our immune system is suppressed. So it's a really good point. Thank you for bringing that out.
When you're dealing with seriously ill people, what you mentioned earlier, standardization is incredibly important. So sometimes we're taking people after 2 years of chemotherapy and radiation, and they're devastated, and their immune system's non-existent. So many years ago, maybe 30 years ago, 35, we started to use specific standardized Silvers IVs. And we found out over the years it's the most effective thing I've ever seen work for Lyme's disease. Other things at best make a dent. This wipes it out quite often. We initially used it for chronic fatigue syndrome. Almost had unanimous results with that. But you've got to watch this. I mean, just like you said, it's true. Some things like golden seal are estrogenic. So I was a master herbalist at one time. I used to train herbalists, and John Christopher taught me. And what was sad is I didn't know that much. And every once in a while I'd have somebody who had breast cancer, and I'm telling them to take golden seal. Not a great idea. So you have to know these things. And so we do use probiotics. We think it's incredibly important to reintroduce good bacteria. Everything that's said on a plant-based diet, specifically high raw. And remember, all prebiotics literally are cellulose. And the only prebiotic, which means creates healthy bacteria, come from plants. Putting chicken or eggs or fish or something else in your body, do you think that that is going to create healthy bacteria in your intestine? If I told you to take a chicken and stick it in your kitchen without refrigeration, in 2 or 3 days, what would the kitchen be like? But it doesn't take 2 or 3 days in your intestinal tract. It takes 20, 30, 40 minutes for that to happen. So you're actually putrefying and creating unfriendly bacteria, weakening your immune system, wiping out the potential to create serotonin, which is a major cause. The intestine and the brain are so interrelated like that. And so we do use probiotics. And, you know, the reality is that a doctor did his homework about 1970s. He was in Santa Barbara, and he went and looked at cadavers, I think 286, and scraped children and women and men, and he found out that we have these common bacillus, common bacteria, and he created a pretty good product then. He wasn't a great businessman. It was Dr. Dophilus. Then Primadophilus came, and you know, we make the new generations of this. And not only do you take it orally, if you have a severe enough problem, if you've taken chemo, radiation, or antibiotics long term, you actually take it out of the capsule, put it in small amounts of water, and implant it anally. It goes directly into the intestinal tract, and that's been very powerful. We see differentials on the blood almost overnight. They start to improve that way.
Yeah, so we use probiotics in our practice. You know, when we see patients, most of them have taken tons of antibiotics, you know, Z-Paks and Cipros for weeks or months. Patients also, we see, you know, many cancer patients, so it'd be like 6 months of chemotherapy has, you know, devastated their microbiome. So we do use probiotics, but you have to be aware that, you know, 90% of the probiotics on the market, you know, if you take the product itself and you examine it, it has about 10% what's on the bottle, in the bottle, by the time you take the bottle. So we have to really look at, like, again, this is where, you know, in our clinic and how we specialize, and I'll cover this tomorrow, it's like, how are things, you know, supplements being manufactured? Because there's a lot of good products out there, but, you know, is that being delivered to the majority of the population? And the answer is no. And so there's a little bit of a failure that the patients or the customers want to have these natural products, but there's a failure in terms of the efficacy of what the outcome they want to get. I also agree with having a lot of fermented foods. You know, these are other ways that we can increase, and then the probiotic diversity. Because when we test people, you know, when we give them a supplement, I can give them 12 Avengers, I call them, of the probiotics that we have available, but you need the whole Marvel comic universe of characters in your gut to actually have the optimum health. And so diversity only comes from eating a plant-based diet with the high amounts of fiber that they mentioned that creates the butyrate in the gut, and the prebiotics and probiotics and those kind of things come from diet. So you have to understand that the diet's foremost, you still has to be plant-based, and then we would supplement when there's deficiencies or it has been insulted. And then going back real quick on the garlic, I just want to make a mention there on the antimicrobial aspects of garlic. That is only when it's fresh. So you can never, raw, cut right then and there. I actually did a study, I published it in 1995, it was the first study published in medical literature on the antifungal effects of garlic extract in the inner ear for ear infections. And so what you have to understand is that when people buy garlic supplements, that's for a different health reason, and it's not for like this antimicrobial action. So if someone's sick and say, oh, I have a health issue, but I don't want to take the garlic because of the breath and the smell and stuff like that, and they take some kind of garlic extract, that won't affect that at all. Okay?
How many of you know in Long Island you have the most powerful drink made on the planet Earth out of incredibly rich, nutrition-rich plants? And Joe, who's working with you, basically knows about that. We should have him speak about it. But it's Xana juice. Xana juice. Write this down and ask Joe, the curly hair, long hair gentleman that's helping here today. He'll tell you about it. It's amazing stuff. We've been using that clinically at the Institute on and off for 4 or 5 years. What that does is shocking. Zana, I believe.
Okay, so I'd like for each of you to make a 3-minute closing comment. And again, I guess the most powerful thing would be if you could give us the most specific direction, sum up, maybe similar to the first question, what is the final, most direct things you want to say to us and to people who watch this on live stream and on video in 2 years from now, from all your wisdom and all your knowledge, not a motivational speech, but the specific things you'd like us to make sure we're taking from the world of supplements, herbs, plants, medicinal mushrooms. If someone says, tell me what to do, you have 3 minutes. Give us your best and final advice, and then Margaret on emotional health.
I'll take this one up to start. May take 3 minutes and 15 seconds. Obviously, some ingredients are eating organic foods, making sure that you're not taking in, to the best extent that you can avoid them, the pesticides, the fungicides, the herbicides, which are so devastating to health. Devastating to soil, water, farm workers, devastating to the end user, concentrated in foods all over the place, certainly avoiding GMOs, making sure that you're getting the various nutrients that people have mentioned here. But again, along the lines that we're entire whole beings, body, mind, and spirit, I see the happiest people, because I travel all over the world. I go to the communities that other people tell incorrect stories about. Oh, they're all vegans. No, that's baloney. The majority of people in the world eat some forms of meat and fish and dairy, and when you look at the longest lived populations on Earth, they do that too. So yes, plant-based foods are absolutely important. Yes, they're super valuable. I've dedicated my entire career to plants. But if you actually look at the science, if you actually look at the people, they're eating broad, diverse diets. I'm going to tell you all something that some of you will be red-faced with anger about, and some of you will go, thank God he finally said it. One of the healthiest things you can put in your body is coffee. I have spent decades going deeper into the science of coffee than almost anybody you will meet. I have read thousands and thousands of pages on this. It is very clear that it is one of the most profound health-enhancing elixirs on Earth today. It's the #1 source of dietary antioxidants in the American diet. Granted, that's not an all plant-based diet. We see that the more coffee you drink, except for people who are caffeine intolerant, the greater the reduced risk of a host of common cancers and other health problems. It is extraordinary stuff. Don't stuff it with cream and sugar. That's a big mistake. And don't ruin it by making bulletproof coffee, because that's just disgusting. But also, the happiest people I see are people who have community. When I go to places, native places, and I do so all the time, the conspicuous thing is people who don't have a lot, who give more than you could ever possibly imagine and take care of each other and are fundamentally and happy in ways that so many people in our culture who are feeling isolated and alone will never, ever be happy. And if you're not happy, who gives a crap if your digestion's good? Seriously. Love people. One of the best ways to be more emotionally healthy is to serve people. I've been very, very fortunate and grateful to engage in a lot of projects, free dental. I mean, we had this colossal, almost Fitzcarraldo-like project. For years, we did a free dental boat in the Amazon. Don't get me started on how difficult that was and how absolutely bring tears to your eyes rewarding it was to pull up to riverfront villages and give them the first dentistry they had ever had in their lives entirely free. And more projects, rebuilding schools. And this isn't about, blowing my horn. This is about making connections with people. When you actually help and serve people, what happens is, unless you really, really try hard to be completely emotionally resistant, you wind up making the kinds of connections that we've been talking about. And you get to understand people. And that fosters a greater sense of, goodness between people, and it bridges misunderstanding, and it helps a host of things that vitamins and minerals and all the enzymes and probiotics and wheatgrass can't possibly begin to get to. So in addition to all the foundational physical, dietary, herbal health things, do not forget the wisdom that we have garnered over thousands of years. Meditate, for goodness sake. Sit down, be quiet, calm your mind. You will develop neural pathways that you didn't have before. You'll develop new habits that are healthier. You'll open your mind. You'll expand your vistas. You'll feel more stress-free. You'll feel more solid inside. You'll feel more competent and aware. This will happen. Make sure you spend time with the people you love. You got kids, spend time with them. You got a partner, spend time with them. You got a community, spend time with them. If we do these things, body, mind, and spirit, we will live good, happy lives. If we neglect any of these major components, we will always suffer. Thank you.
I agree.
I knew you would.
So, just to sum up what he was saying, yes. And then looking at, tomorrow I'll cover in my lecture, though, when we see patients is looking at the, all the epigenetic changes that need to occur. Diet's only one of them, right? It's diet, environment, lifestyle, belief system. So these are the things, when you get all those things in order, which he's talking about, many of those, and a lot of these people will talk about their topics this week as well, and some other speakers coming in. It's epigenetics, which is what is the diet, the lifestyle, environment, belief system. This is what turns on gene expression and turns off gene expression. Genes are not just handed down, and diseases are not just passed down. We create the disease by having the same epigenetics as our parents and our grandparents. So that's number one, it's number key. When it comes to answering Stephen's question, which he's so desperately asking for, okay, for inflammation, I'm going to recommend Bosmeric SR. I'll explain it tomorrow. The strongest natural anti-inflammatory, Bosmeric SR. For immune system, Glucan 300. Now, these are all patented. We all have clinical studies. I'll explain why and what yet tomorrow. But Glucan 300 for your immune system, stimulating natural killer cell function. And comparatively to the 60 other products in the market, in vitro and vivo, has been shown to be better than those. I would recommend vitamin D and getting vitamin D tested so that people can be within the range of 50 to 100, which is optimum. And patients that have chronic issues or more serious issues like a cancer, around 70 is where the data will show. And then looking at like a methylated B complex, as which they mentioned before about people having B12 or folate problems in there. After that, then any other supplement should be targeted for a specific reason. And that's why we look at testing, we look at what disease, we look at what kind of diagnosis, we look at the patient, not only from a Western perspective, but we look at from an Eastern perspective, even different body types. And then there's about balancing their body type. It's about giving targeted things if there's deficiencies. So my book will cover a lot of these topics in general, so if you're interested to learn more, please go ahead and inflammationnation.com.
I would like to say that one of the major things that people need to learn to do is to take responsibility for themselves. It's just too easy to be a victim. It's too easy to give our power away to other people, to professionals, and say, well, my doctor or my therapist or this person told me to do it. we need to learn to trust ourselves. We need to learn to trust our feelings. We need to learn to trust our higher guidance, which is here for all of us. And when we are unwilling to take responsibility for ourselves is when we have problems. That's when we get sick, because we're not taking the time to do the reading we need to do, to understand what we each need. We are each very, very different. There is no blueprint for everybody. What works for me might not work for you on the physical level, emotional level, or spiritual level. And so this is what I teach. I teach people how to learn to take responsibility for themselves physically, emotionally, and spiritually. I work with many people who know how to eat well. They know what to do. They know how to exercise. They know how to meditate. They don't do it. They're in resistance. They're afraid that they're going to be controlled by somebody, even by themselves or by spirit. And so they don't do it. And this is a very, very big problem for a lot of people. They know what to do, but they don't do it because they have never learned what it means to love themselves. And this is what is so, so vitally important. When you learn to love who you are, your essence, when you love your body, when you love your higher guidance, it is very, very easy to take the loving actions that you need to take.
So one of our psychotherapists at the Institute, he always says, it's not what you're eating, it's what eating you. And Brigham Young did a study of loneliness, like you mentioned, and they found that if we're so lonely that TV is our only friend, we lose about 15 years, just as bad as smoking or taking big drugs. So community, yes, community is probably the most important that we have people to share, because we have to bounce off our feelings. We have to bounce off our fears and our happiness. And laughter, of course, is number one. I mean, we all love to laugh, don't we? So we need to share that. And you know, it's not so easy to sit and laugh by ourselves. We share it with other people. It's multiplied thousands and thousands. So sharing a lifestyle of plant-based is, to me, and as you saw in my lecture today, of course, it's the number one reason that we can stop climate change. It is number one reason that we are going to stay healthy. And yes, many cultures in the world are following our cultures too, where they probably would have been 99% plant-based. But you know, you're looking at developed world, and you look at them and say, I want to be like them if they're eating these things. And if you look at now what we're doing to the waters in the Amazons, in the rivers, where people are actually digging for gold illegally, but the way that they find gold, they actually put mercury in first. So they totally poison people who have no idea that the fish they're eating, the water and other critters that they might be eating there is full of it. So definitely go on a plant-based diet. You do yourself such a favor, but find community. Find other peoples that are doing that, and you can support each other and find resources in your community. Thank you.
So, being blessed to work with so many people over the time I've done this, I realize that there's 3 letters that everyone aspires to and needs. Personal, P, plus P, passion, equals success. So I think what really is missing with a lot of us, when we were brought up, you were told to survive, what kind of job are you going to get? be responsible, and we're not being responsible. And we've lost ourselves, and very few people live a passionate life. But everyone you've ever seen and admired, the most successful people in the world, they all have P plus P equals S. There's not one of these people. So when you think about people like Elon Musk, he has P plus P equals S. When you see Mahatma Gandhi, it was that way. When I see people recover from catastrophic cancers, that's what they have. When I see people who have great marriages, both of the partners have that. So you may say, I'm too old to find my passion, I'm still a little lost. You're never too old. The story I'll tell before I move on is about 30 years ago, we had a woman come to us. She was in her mid-50s at the time, and she was really distraught. And been very successful as an accountant, and her 2 daughters were growing and married, and she was happy with all of that, but she was just really, really, it's like a vacuum cleaner of energy. When you got near her, you could feel her draining your energy. And I felt bad for her, but I didn't know what to do, and I felt uncomfortable around her. And she then sort of loosened up, and she said, when I was a little girl, I was a prima ballerina right here in New York. And my parents had captured me and taken us out of the Holocaust. And she said, although I was destined to be one of the top ballerinas in my generation, they were asking me to come on tours worldwide as a child. My mother kept saying, you can't do that. You're going to starve. You can't possibly survive. And after a while, you won't be able to dance. So you've got to find another, and in a way forced her, she felt they were forcing her into going to school and becoming an accountant. And she was so sad her whole life. And she said, can you help me? And I said, I'm not sure, but why don't you try being a ballerina? Now, she's in her mid-50s. So I don't see her for about 2 years, and she comes and knocks on my door at the Institute. And she was hired by the Washington, D.C. Ballet, the oldest woman at that time in history, and danced worldwide with them. And what a difference in this woman. Not only did her disease go away that she had when she came, the cancer, the bone cancer that spread from her liver, but when she went to Miami and couldn't find a suitable vegan restaurant, she opened that up just for fun. P plus P equals success. Personal passion equals success.
Well, I'm passionate about nutrients. And it's not just the nutrients that you need, but when I analyze diets, what I see is a lot of people are eating things that they shouldn't have, like way too much saturated fat, like way too many pollutants and insecticides and organopollutants from history. So it's a good idea to clean up our diets and try and pare down the things that we don't need before even looking at what we do need. And what we really do need, I think, departing from standard nutrition texts, is carotenoids and tocopherols and polyphenols. Those are the real key things that protect us in food, and they're found in whole plant foods. We certainly do also need the B vitamins, which are there. You mentioned the discovery of vitamin B1 thiamine. That was only discovered when rice was first polished into white rice, because before then, no one had ever had beriberi, which means it hurts in Japanese. So we're going to need some nutrients. Now, the omega-3s, I think, are also very important for depression, for neurotransmitters, for especially the eicosanoids. And if you can nourish yourself well enough, you can make those long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids from ALA. So make sure to get some flaxseed or hemp seed or chia seed or echium seed or perilla seed, which is as good as flax, in your diet every day. We also definitely need to get most of our nutrition from whole, fresh plant foods, but we may also need to supplement. Now, getting the nutrition is one thing, but getting it into your cells is another, and exercise is really important there. We need to work out. We all need to keep moving our bodies. Yes. You got to get the nutrition to where it's got to go. And as far as brain health goes, we need to move our bodies to pump the blood through our brain, because perfusion of blood into the brain is one of the crucial aspects. And there you have those yogis going upside down. It's not a bad idea either. Bouncing is really good too. So among the different nutrients, we can get pretty much what we need. But if you are fully plant-based, as I am, you want to make sure and get your B12. It's crucial. And as mentioned, most clinical cases of B12 deficiency are in people who do eat meat, but their digestion is not able to absorb the vitamin B12 with intrinsic factor. Other than that, watch your calcium levels. Make sure you get enough. And I like to think about, how do you know if you're getting enough calcium or any other nutrient? Well, there's pretty much 3 ways. You can guess, which is what everybody does. You can analyze your diet and find out how much you're getting, which is what I do. And then you can supplement your diet to make sure you're not missing anything, like little trace minerals like copper, zinc, and manganese or selenium, just to make sure you're getting them. And yes, the form is crucially important, as is the quantity on each one. Food, I think, is the most important factor in health. It does affect your depression. We've been found in many studies that plant-based diets relieve depression, and meat and junk food increase depression. Big surprise, right? So if you can transition more to a plant-based diet, you may be happier and healthier and get less of the bad things and more of the good things. And I certainly agree with the people who are saying organic is best. These days, organic is very easy to access and well worth the tiny extra money. Thank you for letting me help today. It's been a pleasure.
I want to thank the whole panel for doing such a great job. And I want to thank Steve over here for organizing it. In my world, which is very spiritually focused, I see it a little bit from the top down. So I see connecting with our soul as being primary, connecting with God as being primary, and that affecting how we relate to our mind. So that's why I say that the personality, which includes the mind, is a case of mistaken identity. When we're identifying with the deeper truth of who we are, we're less likely to be agitated by our mind. Okay, and how we are in our mind and how we are in our spirit profoundly affects our physiological state. That's been proven over and over again. So by focusing on the mind and the divine, we create the best operating field for our bodies and also for our emotions. Now, where it comes out of focusing on the mind and, in a sense, the spirit, is loving ourselves. And so a fundamental to the whole process is loving yourself enough to want to heal yourself. So I have an approach that kind of covers this, and I call it the natural way of living that leads you to liberation, natural way of living. And that includes 100% vegan diet, at least 80% raw at least, and fasting a week twice a year. It also includes building what we call the chi or prana or nephesh, pranayama, and yoga, which we're doing tomorrow starting at 7, and tai chi, qigong. It includes service and charity, myself, because I don't tell you anything I'm not going to do. We have over 116 different humanitarian programs in 16 different countries. So service and charity opens the heart, helps you connect to other people. That was very eloquently stated. Thank you. And then we look at working with mentors, group support, and so forth. And then meditating. We know that people who meditate, just even for 5 years, have a physiology that's 15 years younger, okay? And then finally, just focusing on God. Now, that's the 6 foundations, the 7-fold piece, is peace with the body, peace with the mind, and also peace with the family. So do we have the right relationship with our family? Whatever that is, we need to be at peace with it. Peace with the larger community. A lot of chaos in the world today. How do we have the right détente, the right peace with that? Peace with all cultures, from the Native American way, peace with the living planet, peace with the plant world, and peace with the animal world. And of course, vegan helps a big way that, right? And peace with the human cultures. And then we have peace with all the different cultures. Then we're looking at peace with the ecology and peace with God. And we have all those 13 integrated. Then we have a total health program of a way of being. And when we're at peace at that level, because peace is very important for a quiet mind and so forth, then we're able to access the truth of who we are, and we're able to love ourselves enough to want to heal ourselves. Blessings to everyone.
Namaste.